My name is Bill Finnegan. I'm a staff writer at The New Yorker. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Ray Kelly is, as I'm sure you all know, the police commissioner of New York City. He grew up right here on the west side, maybe a little further uptown. In fact, he once told me that he grew up in a neighborhood that was straight out of West Side Story. You know, the Jets and the Sharks. Not quite the Bloods and the Crips, but I think same idea. Ray Kelly came up the long way. He went from police cadet to commissioner, the only officer in the history of the New York City Police Department to do that. He's spent 31 years in the NYPD, had 25 different commands there. In fact, he's been commissioner twice. First time 92 to 94 under Mayor David Dinkins, and again now since January 2002. In the interregnum there, also known as the Giuliani years, he was mostly in Washington, where he served as commissioner of the U.S. Customs Service and as an undersecretary at the Treasury, where he was responsible for, among other agencies, Customs, the Secret Service, the ATF. He also led the multinational police force in Haiti in 1994 and was vice president of Interpol for the Americas. He's a combat veteran of the Vietnam War, retired as a colonel from the Marine Corps Reserves after 30 years of service, holds a BBA from Manhattan College, a JD from St. John's, an LLM from NYU, and an MPA from Harvard. But let me start by asking the obvious question. Commissioner, it's been nearly 7 years since 9/11. How do you maintain in the department the sense of urgency that good counterterrorism work requires, you know, as time passes and the fear of another attack by al-Qaeda inevitably subsides?
With some difficulty. We have world-class professionals. You mentioned our intelligence division, David Cohn, in charge of that division, 35-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, Richard Falkenrath, a deputy commissioner of counterterrorism, PhD, a former Homeland Security advisor to President Bush, a member of the Brookings Institution. They are, as I say, world-class. They're on their toes every day. So how do we spread out that alertness level, if you will, throughout the organization? We do it in a variety of ways. We have inspectors, which are high-level people, reporting to Commissioner Falkenrath. They're embedded, you might say, in our patrol boroughs throughout the city. It's their job to make certain that people are properly equipped and properly trained. We have mobilizations every day. You might see them with radio cards go out to go through the Manhattan for the most part with their lights on. We mobilize them in major locations in Manhattan and then send them to sensitive locations in smaller convoys. They spend time there. They do this on an unannounced basis as part of a comprehensive plan. But at each of those mobilizations, there is a briefing for the officers, and these are different officers each day who come. We give them a bit of insight to what's going on in the world and some of our concerns in the city. So they're practicing mobilization, and they become at least aware of what our concerns on that particular day as far as terrorism is concerned. But it's a challenge, and we know that complacency has set in the public at large.
So even when the threat's not in the headlines, you guys are doing that daily briefing that spins people up. Well, you've worked in Washington. Why is the NYPD able to act so much faster than the federal agencies tasked with countering the terror threat, FBI, CIA, Department of Homeland Security? I say this, I've done some reporting on this subject. David Cohen, head of the intelligence division, when the commissioner mentioned, said to me that the NYPD is on a hair trigger, that he's never seen the gap so small between information and action. And meanwhile, the NYPD is almost twice the size of the FBI, but is able to act so quickly. Why do you think?
We're a hierarchical organization, tightly structured. The commissioner, whoever the commissioner is the boss. You don't have congressional involvement, which you do in virtually everything in Washington, irrespective of who's in power in Congress or in the White House. Congress is into everything, and by nature, it just slows things down. And that's what we have a lot of federal people that we brought on board, and that's their reaction. Wow, there's something been lifted off of our shoulders here, and we pride ourselves on our ability to respond quickly to any emergency.
I remember when I talked to David Cohen about some of this, and he said that you guys talked one week about perhaps stationing some NYPD officers overseas, which they ended up doing. They've got, I don't know how many people know this, but they've got detectives stationed in Britain and Israel and France and Singapore. I mean, this is real forward deployment that the NYPD does, mostly quite quietly. And Cohen said that they sort of talked about it one week, and the next week he wanted to bring it up again, and the commissioner cut him off and said, "I thought we already decided that." And so it was done. These detectives abroad I just mentioned, who work directly with local police and security services, developing intelligence as fast as possible on any possible threat to New York. Quite an unusual deployment, and not uncontroversial, I think. I'm wondering if, a lot of turf questions there. If the FBI in particular, which operates overseas normally from what they call an embassy platform, and then suddenly there's these NYPD cops sitting at the local police station, if they've come to accept the overseas deployments more than at first?
Well, Bob Mueller certainly has accepted. He said so publicly. I think there's still grumblings at the lower level. Our officers are embedded with law enforcement overseas. It's kind of a cop-to-cop relationship, whereas as far as the FBI position is concerned, they're in the embassies. They're still working very much for the federal government. So it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but I can understand that, we put some noses out of joint. But it's pretty much, I think, accepted. It's going to be, I guess, for a while, so they've accepted it.
No pressure to roll that back?
I certainly have no plans to roll it back. As a matter of fact, we're looking to expand it in some other cities. We're talking to other countries now to enable us to do that. Now, this is funded by a foundation, so they get paid their salaries by New York City taxpayers, but their expenses are funded by a private foundation. And that's, I think, a good relationship, because as the budget gets tighter, people will be, looking at those positions and say, "Hey, how come I had a burger in my block and you've got somebody in Amman, Jordan?" And we want to be able to, defend it from the ordinary budget attack.
I wonder if you see the nature of the threat to New York changing. If there's been any new patterns in the intelligence you're receiving from either from overseas or from the streets here, or NYPD has quite a sophisticated cyber intelligence unit, making its way through jihadist chat rooms and such places, or if there's been any blowback from the Iraq War yet.
Fundamentally, I don't think the threat has changed. I think it's pretty consistent. Some people think that it ebbs and flows. We don't really think that. We're in a battle for the long term here, and we believe that if they could come here, they'd come here. This is the capital of the world. To many people, it's the media capital, financial capital. We've been attacked here twice successfully, so another attack here would really be a feather in their cap. So we don't see the threat as fundamentally changing. The threat being a threat either carried out by Al-Qaeda Central or by homegrown terrorists, which is a phenomenon that we've looked at in depth in the NYPD. We did a report on radicalization of these homegrown terrorists. We looked at 11 cases. We sent our intelligence analysts to several locations throughout the world and put out a report, a 90-page report on radicalization. It's on our website if anyone's interested in reading it. It really was very well received by the intelligence community at large, and we've had several conferences as a result of that. But that sort of underscores the threat as we see it. Certainly the homegrown phenomena is something that is a real possibility. We had a case right here in New York City, but there's also the possibility of Al-Qaeda Central sending agents here from abroad.
It seems to me that in ways that aren't always particularly obvious, that the city is really being changed by the counterterrorism effort. I wonder if you could talk about some of the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative, for instance. Lower Manhattan, considered a major terrorist target, is really being sort of transformed, some parts visibly, a lot of it not.
Yeah, so what you have now is the kind of developing confluence of really the financial services, major players in Lower Manhattan. You have the Goldman Sachs Tower that's under construction now, because Goldman Sachs is downtown now. You have the Freedom Tower that's under construction. You have the World Financial Center, New York Stock Exchange. You have 3 other large structures that will be put up on the World Trade Center site. So in order to protect that area, it really, as no other area is protected in the world, we've started something called the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative. It's a security overlay that I believe will make the area from Canal Street South the most secure business district in the world. And it'll be up and running fully probably by 2011, 2012. Mm-hmm. It consists of a network of cameras, about 3,000 cameras, 1,000 public sector cameras, 2,000 private sector cameras, networked together. We'll have over 130 license plate readers. We'll have actual physical barriers that will be able to wall off the area in extreme situations. We have a coordination center that we've already started to construct, to build out at 55 Broadway, and it'll contain public and private sector stakeholders in one location, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We will add several hundred police officers to that area as well. And we've gotten federal funding for it. There's been city funding. And as I say, it'll start to really fully function 2011, 2012 as these buildings, as this construction starts to be completed or will be finished, these major structures.
How about mass transit?
Mass transit, the subway system here, of course, is the second biggest in the world next to Moscow. We have 468 stations. We have almost 700 miles of track, and it's an area of concern to us. About 40% of the terrorist attacks throughout the world are focused at the transportation facilities. So we have about 2,600 police officers assigned to our transit bureau. We have a bag check regimen that we put in place that we did shortly after the London bombings in 2005. We have some detection equipment, and more will be coming into the transit system. We have dogs that we've specially trained to work in the subway system. We have certain tactics that we use, surges, TOMs, train on a maintenance sweeps, where officers get on each car of a train. And
those are new, I think, eh?
We've been doing them for a while, but we changed the face of it. We just put in a torch program, which is a program where we'll put heavily armed officers in the stations. Now, this is a program for the first time that's being funded. The personnel costs are being funded by the federal government, which is a positive sign. We haven't been able to get personnel costs reimbursed on a regular basis from the federal government. So this is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. We should probably mention that federal funding for New York City's counterterrorism and New York State's counterterrorism efforts has been a real bone of contention since the creation of Department of Homeland Security, if not before. The budgeting formula has been very advantageous to North Dakota, but very disadvantageous to New York City, and Commissioner's been in the forefront of that. How's that battle going?
It's better. I think there has been somewhat of a change of heart in Washington and Homeland Security. Our major expense are personnel costs, boots on the ground, as they say. So we spend about $200 million a year for our counterterrorism efforts. We get reimbursed for portions of that, but not nearly as much as we believe we should be getting back. But as I say, in the transit grant area, we've seen some movement in the right direction.
I wonder if you want to talk more generally about the sort of management challenges in your job at this point. I mean, for instance, how the political fallout from tragedies like the Sean Bell shooting complicate those challenges. I'm sort of jumping tracks here, but this is also the job.
I mean, obviously, it creates tensions in the communities that we serve. I've had this job before as police commissioner. I've been in the organization a long time. I believe, generally speaking, our relations with the communities that we serve are better now than they've ever been. But there's always going to be some tension because of the nature of what we do. We give out summonses, we arrest people, we use force, sometimes we use deadly force, certainly sometimes we make mistakes. So there's always a certain amount of tension, and when that tension rises, it makes the job more difficult for everybody. It makes it more difficult for the commissioner on down. There's hostility in certain communities that, certainly it can evidence itself in a lot of different ways. So it complicates the life of the department.
Yeah. Your commanders sometimes talk about adding a counterterrorism element to event management, crowd control, to even accident investigations that would formerly have been routine. Could you talk a bit about that?
Well, anytime you have large gatherings of people, now we have to factor in the possibility that there may be a terrorist act. So this requires additional personnel, certain types of equipment. When the Pope was here, for instance, we deployed a lot of police officers, and we did things to block off streets that perhaps in another time we wouldn't have done. So when we say overlay usually translates into more personnel and more money for a particular event, be it New Year's Eve or a parade. We're going to have the Israeli Day parade coming up here in early June. That's going to be a concern for us. The Prime Minister will be here. So the world has changed as far as we're concerned, post 9/11, in terms of covering major events, and it translates into a more cost for us.
Yeah. One of your commanders gave me an example. He said that a tanker truck collision, an accident, is no longer just treated as an accident, at least not in New York. It's immediately investigated very, very heavily. It's sealed off. NYPD controls the site rather than the fire department. Always treated as who's driving this thing. That you're aware of instructions from Al Qaeda commanders that people should be getting their tanker driving licenses, their hazmat licenses, and so on. That this is a viable attack mode, and therefore it changes your procedures.
That's right. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was the mastermind of 9/11, he sent Ayman Ferris here, who scouted out the Brooklyn Bridge in an effort to take it down. But Ayman Ferris was, in fact, a licensed hazmat driver and hazardous material driver, and he was also tasked with looking at the possibilities of using tanker trucks to do significant damage here.
I don't know if people followed that case in the papers. There have been a number of terrorist plots, if we can call them that have arisen in the years since 9/11, which have been thwarted at different stages and different levels. This Ayman Ferris and the Brooklyn Bridge was a big one. As another one known as the Al-Hindi case. Al-Hindi was a senior Al-Qaeda commander who'd done a very detailed reconnaissance here, was arrested in Britain and convicted, and is now serving time in Britain. I think that's still kind of a live case, is it not?
Well, he's in jail. Actually, his sentence was reduced somewhat, but there's a lot of information that we believe he had on computers that we'd like to get access to, and it's I think still ongoing efforts in that regard.
I think that prevention is sort of an inherently boring, even terrorism is sort of an inherently boring enterprise. It's basically civil defense, retooled in this case for the age of terror. And success means that nothing happens. And so the political temptation is always, I think, to play the politics of fear. It's a temptation that the Bush administration for instance, has not always resisted. Whereas I think New York City has gone about its counterterrorism work much more quietly, and I dare say more seriously. Programs like Nexus, I mean, not well known, but this Nexus is directed toward private businesses, basically, merchants that might be in any way terror-related, you know, unbeknownst to them, salvage yards and truck rental agencies, and I mean, the list is actually hundreds of types of businesses long, hotels. You know, it's public outreach, and it's very ambitious, but they really haven't served to scare people at all, I don't think, Nexus. So I wonder if you could say something about trying to strike that balance, you know, between public awareness, public readiness, and fear. You know, between the maintenance of our civil liberties and I'd say the traditional openness of New York City, and hardening the target, as they say in the counterterrorism business.
Well, it's difficult to identify the point at which that balance lies. We understand. I think we're still feeling our way. People are sometimes alarmed when they see heavily armed officers at a location. We just, as I say, introduced them into the subway. You know, people have commented that they've been shocked by that, that sort of thing.
I'm shocked by it. So I don't like seeing automatic weapons in the subway.
So, you know, we're trying to strike that balance. As I say, we're feeling our way, but we know that this is the #1 target in the United States for terrorists. We know that because it is clearly the consensus of the intelligence community. So what do we do to better protect ourselves? We do a variety of things. Some of those things, you know, people may see as infringing on civil liberties. So we're very conscious of that. We have, you know, many lawyers that look at our actions before we do it to make certain that certainly you know, adhere to the law. But this is still a new territory for this country and for the city. So we're feeling our way.
I wonder if you could say something. I mean, New York's in kind of a unique position nationally as well as internationally, I think. There's a new federal program, the Securing the Cities Initiative. New York's been given a lead role.
Yeah.
You could say something about that?
We are the first city. This is a pilot program to protect the city from, God forbid, a nuclear or radiological attack. It's really being run through an office in Homeland Security, Domestic Office of Nuclear Detection. We are the first city to be involved in this project. It's right now a $40 million project that will set up a series of sort of concentric circles from the city, branching out from the city for about 50 miles, to set up radiation detectors in Connecticut, in New Jersey, in New York, and indeed right here in the city as well. There'll be state-of-the-art radiation detectors. We've already gotten a new generation of pager detectors, belt-type detectors, several thousand of them, and we've distributed them to other agencies in the metropolitan area. And we'll have them also, they'll be tied into our Lower Manhattan security initiative. But it is an attempt to identify radiological material on its way to New York or found to be in New York City. And as I say, it's a first anywhere in the country.
Well, I'm glad to hear that's happening. I don't know if it makes me feel safer hear about these belt radiation pagers. I think we're out of time. I think that the commissioner would be happy to. There's some local press that would like to talk to him, perhaps off stage. Thank you very, very much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, everybody.